Hello and welcome to In Service to Transformation with me, your host, Claire Darnell. And this week I'm joined by Emma Kelly. Emma is a yoga and meditation teacher, a yoga retreat host, and an African spirituality researcher and mentor. Emma is somebody who I encountered via Instagram and I found her content really inspiring. We had a chat and yeah, she really got me thinking about heritage, about the whole subject of race and identity. And she challenged actually some of my internalized preconceived ideas, many of which no doubt had been imprinted upon my mind by the society we live in. And I think that there's lots that Emma has to offer in terms of, yeah, her perspective on the world. So I hope you will enjoy this episode. Let me introduce you. So hi Emma, it's good to have you here.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me on to the podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation and seeing where it kind of leads to.
Thank you. And thank you for your yes and your interest in coming to share your wisdom with everybody. So I'm really curious. I know that many of us who land on this pathway of healing and working with others have journeyed a pathway of healing ourselves. Can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit more about your own journey and how how you landed in this space? What led you to that place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I suppose we have lots of twists and turns along the way, don't we? And the journey
Mm.
is ever evolving of transformation, isn't it? Really, we're never at
Yes.
that completion. Um,
Yes.
So I suppose for me, there's a couple of like points along the way in my life that I can share that were kind of when I decided to get into the healing, the spirituality, the wellness. So firstly, my first introduction into yoga, formal introduction, was when I started university. So
Mhm.
I enrolled in I did the degree, I did a social work degree,
Mm.
and I was just looking for something that helped me with my stress, helped me feel a bit calmer, manage what I was doing. And I just went into that yoga class and felt amazing. I just felt really calm. I told my housemates I feel like really floaty. And
Mm.
I'd not really felt that sense of calm before, in all honesty. And just that kind of like, I have a lot of mental chatter.
Yeah.
Me, yoga, the main aspect is the mental and emotional benefits that I felt. The physical as well, yes, but it's my
Mm.
overall being. And some people may say their spirit, their soul, their energy. And that's really, for me, the practice of yoga, which
Mm.
led on to meditation. Uh,
Mm.
so that was kind of like the starting. So that's
Yeah.
about 18 years ago now.
Beautiful.
Yoga was like the main thing for me. And then I did go into social work,
Mm.
and that was very, very stressful. And it just wasn't for me in the end. Excuse me. Yeah, it wasn't. It was very difficult, very, very difficult profession. You're dealing with a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
And for me, dealing with that every day really impacted my view of the world, where I felt like
Mm.
that was the world. When you're dealing with such like the things that I was having to deal with were the more, I suppose, the more extreme end of trauma. And yeah, that was kind of like a daily thing. And when you go into professions like that, they don't actually, there's no aspect, well, this was 18 years ago. It may have changed now, but there
Mm.
was no real acknowledgement about the emotional and
Yes.
mental impact on you as a human.
Mm.
And how are you actually going to, they say like keep it at work or, whatever it is, but
Yeah.
actually, if you're a sensitive soul, if you're a thinker, if you're compassionate, if you have a lot of empathy,
Mm.
how do you really kind of like switch off? Um, So
Yes.
I suppose for me, yoga again was something that supported me
Yes.
to an extent to be able to manage the stress, manage the kind of the heaviness of that work. But eventually I was like, you know what, I'm not happy, I need to change.
Mm.
And that's where I actually decided to become a yoga teacher,
Mm.
and went training, went off to India, and thought, okay, I'm gonna be a yoga teacher. Just,
Yeah.
you know, quit my job. And it all sounds so like, wow,
Simple.
but yeah, so simple. Like I was
I bet it wasn't. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
because social work is, I mean, just to stay there for a moment, social work's such a calling. And,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
very often people I know that have moved into social work have done that because they've had their own adverse experiences. And was that the case for you? What was it that called you into that field of work?
Yeah, so that's a really good question that I suppose for me is something that I'm still untangling and trying to figure
Mm.
out. I suppose the sense of justice has been
Yeah.
something innate in me,
Mm.
and that wanting to support people who I felt like they were disempowered. So in that job, you have a bit more
Mm.
power, you can share that power.
Mm.
So yeah, I think I was always getting in trouble at school for speaking up for other people where I thought something wasn't fair, or people were being unfairly picked out. I was always the one, not always, but I was the one who had that a voice, but
Mm.
actually it wasn't, I wouldn't say that was something that was particularly, what's the word? Yeah, that wasn't seen as good
Yeah.
at all. That was like, no, you're a troublemaker,
Yes.
keep your head down, be quiet. So yeah,
Mm.
so yeah, I do think I've had that speaking up, even when it gets me into trouble, just
Yeah.
having that I always felt like I had to do that, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. A real advocacy about you then, and a
Yeah, I
realization.
think so. I think so. And I suppose as we learn and we go through our own journey, we realize, oh, okay, we can do that for others, but we need to do it for ourselves as well. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that's the that's the next piece, isn't it, for a lot of people
Yeah.
who are in, you know, whether it's social work, whether it's nurses, because I work, you know, lots of people over the years. You know,
Mm.
it does tend to be a lot of women who are in caring professions. I work with a lot of yoga teachers,
Mm.
just school teachers, counselors, therapists, and there is that like empathy for others, compassion for others, and wanting to
Mm.
give, and then trying to remember yourself
Yes.
at giving. So I suppose for me, that's something that probably came later. That
Mm.
actually you need to put yourself first
Yeah.
and keep that balance of yes, I'm going to give to others, but I need to maintain what is right for me, maintain my boundaries, and say,
Yeah.
actually, I can't do this anymore.
Mm.
So yeah, I left social work and went on
Mm.
to teach yoga,
Mm.
and was not really prepared, to be honest,
Yeah.
with what you're meant to do, the business side.
Mm.
Um, and then, so from there, I think the next point of like my healing journey was when I
Mm.
became interested in African spirituality. So
Mm.
I think I got to the point where I saw kind of little bits and pieces online, like Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah.
And it was, I didn't really know that it was an African spirituality page, but they kept putting
Yeah.
posts up, and I was like, oh, I like this, I like this, I like this. And then I went onto it and I was like, okay, this is a this is African spirituality site. And
Yeah.
I was like, wow, why have I never thought about learning about African spirituality? Why have I never heard about it? It's just been completely off my radar.
Yeah.
And this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago,
Mm.
approximately. And I thought, well,
Mm.
how come there is a blank? That's how it felt. There is a complete blank for me at
Yes.
that time. After I had taken a lot of time, I've been to India, studied yoga, aspects of Hinduism, I practice Buddhist teachings, meditation,
Mm.
I've done for a long, long time. So I knew a lot about Eastern traditions, and I knew absolutely nothing about African spirituality,
Yeah.
and which is part of my own identity and my own heritage. So yeah, I suppose from there it was like I wanted to know, what is it and why
Yeah.
don't I know anything? Why is it that it's so, we don't see anything. We see
Yeah.
lots and lots of things about
It's
Eastern practices.
obfuscated from any history, isn't it? It's just removed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So I kind of went on that journey of like, why don't I know?
Yeah.
How was it hidden? What's been the process of hiding it, destroying it? Why is it seen as dangerous? Because that's the other aspect to it. There's a lot of stigma. There is a lot of, fear around these traditions. There is a lot of misinformation. So I kind of went down that rabbit hole of looking into the historical connection of these practices and the journey that it took through the transatlantic slave trade, because my background is Jamaican and white British.
Yes.
So yeah, really that kind of opened up a doorway for me, where it was really about me learning for myself.
Yeah.
And then,
Are you willing to go a little bit deeper on some of those questions you were asking yourself? Like, why don't I know about this? And
yeah,
are
definitely.
you willing to sort of share a little bit about what conclusions you drew?
Yeah, so the reason why so if I take Jamaica for an example, the the African Caribbean spirituality there is illegal. I think it's actually still illegal to this day. So if
Wow.
you go, I don't know what point in history, we're going back hundreds and hundreds of years during the time of when they brought the Africans over who were made enslaved. The process of colonization, they made sure they had no name. So they took away their African name, they took away their African, their drumming, their music, their language as well. So colonization was the colonization of the mind, body, and the spirit.
Yes.
So they also had to ensure that they were all forced to convert to Christianity. And through that process, anything African was seen as animalistic. It was seen as bad. It was seen as all the terrible things. So yeah, and also what happened was through that process of colonization, they realized that the African aspects to their identity actually gave them a lot of strength and gave them hope. So when you look at a lot of the revolutions that took place, they were led by the spirituality practitioners. So in Jamaica, that's something that we've looked at, myself and a friend who we do quite a lot of work together. So if anybody's Jamaican heritage, they'll know Queen Nanny of the Maroons.
Yes.
And she was an Obia woman. So that's kind of usually a race. The fact that she was her spiritual practices were actually essential to her revolutionary work that she did. And then also, if you look at Haiti, which I've looked at in quite a bit of detail, when you had the Haitian Revolution, there was the voodoo, or Vodun is actually the correct terminology they use. The Vodun priestesses, priests, they were the main people who brought the community together. They gave them hope, they gave them a sense of identity, they gave them a sense of strength as well. So during that time of the uprising, they saw that the spiritual practitioners were very important in the communities. They were targeted, so they were murdered in front of people, and they said, anybody who practices this, you're going to be in the same position. Your life is ended. So there was, I think, what I have interpreted, that you know, if you speak to a lot of Jamaican people, if you say the word obia, which is
Yes,
there's like fear,
that's right. Yeah.
and like, oh, you're going to be dealing with the devil and all these sorts
Seen
of
as dark magic, right?
yeah. And the thing is with a lot of African spiritual practices, it's not love and light. Yeah, so we have a very very narrow defined perspective of, you know, spirituality here in the UK, that it's all, you know, it's all love and light. But the people who used their practices then, it wasn't love and light. That was not a love and light situation they were in. And they had to use their spiritual knowledge for good and also to help people, because they had to protect themselves. They had to try and survive. So they would use a lot of poisons. So the Obia women, and men, they would use a lot of poisons on the slave owners, which was a very common thing. So they had the wisdom and the knowledge to harm as well as to help.
Yes.
So I think so yes, it can be used to harm. That's a fact. And I suppose a lot of spiritual practices, religions, they pretend that they don't harm people.
Yeah. And one could argue,
when really, you know, there's been a lot of harm.
Yeah, it comes back to that sense of justice, right? It's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, who's really being harmed?
Exactly.
Ultimately? Yeah, no smoke without fire, right?
Yeah, and I think coming back to the thing of like why so many people are scared of it, I think it's a misdirected fear, intergenerational fear of like you're scared to be around that person because your ancestors were either around that person and saw them die.
Yes.
They knew, do not speak to that person because that is the end of your life. Not because that person is going to be ending your life, but just through association, you are in danger. So I think there's this like danger, and also just a lot of misinformation from colonial Christianity about it being the devil's work.
So interesting, because I was speaking to my friend yesterday, Alexis, who was telling me about post-traumatic slavery, post-traumatic slave syndrome. Yeah. And was saying that, is it Dr. Joy Ruleri, and was suggesting I catch up with this video recording that she shared with me. Yeah, just speaking and sort of almost really overlaying exactly what you're saying about the impact of that, and it just embodied in our DNA, generational fear. And you see it also with the witch wound, right? So we see
it's the
same thing with the witch wound, that inherent fear of other women, because at some point in our DNA, our history, we were forced to commit names to individuals who wanted, again, it came back to, unfortunately, religious beliefs, and we were forced to, you know, commit our own family, our own kin, our own village, fellow village people to burned at the stake or drowned, or in order to, you know, satiate the bloodthirstiness of a witch hunter. So fascinating to me that we do carry those codes in our DNA, and it's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah, and I think the science is like starting to look at it a little bit more now, and they call it epigenetics. So you know that they've done studies on Jewish descendants of the Holocaust. So they look at the children and the grandchildren, and they notice that there is a lot of different markers in terms of mental well-being. And also I know within another study that they did in South Asia, where they were looking at, because during colonization there was like loads and loads of famines that took place. And this like the way that South Asian people store the fat in the body is a direct result of the starvation that kind of took place over, you know, quite a lot of time, and just seeing how the body has actually adapted to,
Interesting.
you know, a survival adaptation, I suppose it is really. So there is certain like studies that are now coming up where it is saying, yeah, there is definitely things that your grandmother, your grandfather, what they experienced.
Way back, yeah.
You know,
And it's interesting. You touched on the famine, but even that is it's a method of colonial control. So many of these famines were enforced upon people as by way of ethnic cleansing, population control, and ultimately subjugation of an entire race of people. So
it's I suppose it's the I suppose for people it's a bit of a like it seems so far away, doesn't it? Of like how can it still affect us? How, this is hundreds like it's not that long ago, you know. The transatlantic slave trade probably was about the late 1800s that it finished, so it's not you know, it's not too far back, to be honest.
And let's be honest, slavery still exists today.
Exactly.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm feeling activated. You're sharing this. I want you to continue. It's fascinating, and it's essential that people are made aware of these things. And I'm feeling deeply activated. And I'm wondering, as you've been moving through this journey, what impact that's had for you personally. You know, what you've journeyed through emotionally and spiritually.
Yeah.
You understand all of these facts.
So I think it takes time, doesn't it? You can't. I'm not like reading about all this intergenerational trauma. I tend to look more at the healing aspect. So I tend to look at what were the practices that helped, what were the practices that healed, where can I see the commonalities, where can I see the joy, and that's probably the thing that I'm going to look at the most. But then I have to acknowledge the trauma as well, but I have to face it. So I can't, there's lots of things I can't read. Maybe I'm going to read just a little bit. But yeah, it definitely impacts me when you read, read these things, that they happened. But I think it's, you have to, through any healing process, you have to know the truth. You can't heal if you ignore the truth, which, I think we do as humans, don't we? Maybe we're gonna go around it. We're gonna try and
circumnavigate
do all the nice practices. This feels nice, but it's like, have you actually dealt with that thing that is not very nice?
The wound.
Yeah. So I think it's taking it slow, taking it easy, but then also have people that I can connect with and share, and we discuss together. So it's not quite a lonely practice, you know what I mean?
Totally. And I loved what you touched on there, because actually I think also part of the ongoing battle with colonization is this constant view of blackness, let's call it blackness, as something that's wrong, something that is criminal, something that is sad, something that is oppressed. Focus on, slavery versus black joy. And there's so much more in the spectrum of being of color, whether you're black, brown, that is joy inducing, that is nourishing, that is medicinal, that is creative. So I love that you touched on that.
There's two sides, isn't there? Two sides, and it's important that you go into both. You can't just go to the joy, and you can't just go to the trauma, because it's just not, it's not reality, is it?
No. And there's a whole spectrum, right? It's even the shades between the I don't want to say good and bad, but the light, the dark, the healing, the positive, the joy, the sadness. There's a whole spectrum of
and I think the reason why I talk about it is because there is I think sometimes there can be a shame around having ancestors who are enslaved, but for me, I don't have any shame. because they didn't choose it.
No.
There was the uprising, the fighting back, that has been erased from history. But actually, the only reason that the transatlantic slave trade stopped is not because, I don't know, whoever was in power in America or in Europe decided, it was because the Africans fought back so aggressively, they no longer was able to make it profitable. So I think it reminds you of the power and strength that they had, rather than this kind of weird narrative of it just kind of
A
happened.
benevolent white person came along as a white savior. That feeds the white savior complex, right?
Yeah, and that they were kind of, like, it wasn't, they were fighting all the time, literally all the time. It wasn't something that was accepted. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, so I suppose it brings me strength personally, and to help other people, like, say, why would you be ashamed of something that that your ancestors experienced that's terrible? That shame was not theirs to carry, it was the oppressors to carry. But
and it comes back to capitalism as well, right? Which is a regime we're all experiencing now, and we're seeing modern day slavery effectively in, Sudan, Congo, as a result of this capitalism and these constructs and structures. And when I look back at my own heritage and my great-great-grandfather, who was a descendant of a slave from Sudan, and when I first found that out, I had an element of sadness, and then I had this element of pride that he survived, right? And he managed to like continue his bloodline and his family in the best way that he could. And hearing more about that story and that heritage, actually finding out that his own father had been in the slave trade, his own Muslim Sudanese black father had sold other black people into the slave trade. And so when it came to Suleiman making a decision, when he was given his freedom, when his master passed, he had made the decision not to return to his homeland, because he wanted to repent for the sins of his father. He didn't want to go home to these ill-gotten gains that his father had made, these riches, through trading slaves. So it's fascinating, because it is through all cultures, all societies, that we're really all victims of capitalism.
And I suppose it's that decision that we all make of what do we do with what we know about the people who came before us, because actually everybody has a mix of, this is debated a little bit, depending on a mix of good ancestors and bad ancestors. It's not fully clear of good and bad, but ones who harmed others and ones who were on the side of not harming others and trying to make the world a little bit better. So nobody has a bloodline, because our ancestors go back, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of ancestors. So we can't pretend that anyone's got all good, or all bad. There's got to be one. Do you know what I mean? Even if
there's always one with,
even if you come from family, or you think, actually, there isn't really people who I have that connection with, who I don't have the same values. Sometimes you have to go a little bit further back to find somebody who you have more alignment with on your path. But it's up to each one of us to decide, well, actually, do we try to heal some of the harm that our ancestors did, or do we kind of pretend like it didn't happen and don't make that change? And do we uplift the ones who did the good and maybe take strength from them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Wow, what a journey, and what a pathway to healing. So you fell into this kind of research hole, right? This incredible elongated research hole that I have no doubt you're still unearthing all sorts of things. And what impact did that have if you don't mind me diving into your own relationship with your family as you started to find out these pieces.
Yeah, well, so I can really only talk about my partner. That's my family.
Mm,
So for me, when I went down this route, um, I think I think for him, I think it strengthened our bond, to be honest,
yeah.
because he has the same heritage as me. So he's also
Mm,
Caribbean and white British. And yeah, I think it did strengthen our bond actually, because there's certain aspects that I learned that were part of an African spirituality background, that experiences that we already had.
mm,
Yeah, so there's a lot of dream interpretation within
mm,
African spirituality, that you receive messages through your dream. So we kind of had them conversations a lot anyway, where we'd say,
yeah.
or um, in certain African traditions, synchronicity, that can be seen as you're getting messages. Okay, so
Yeah.
the one about the numbers, you always see it online and Instagram, like your angel,
Angel numbers and stuff, right?
but our coincidences would go
Mm,
far, far more in depth than that. And
mm,
so I think, yeah, so we'd have conversations quite a lot about certain things that we experience or see that we're like, that's really interesting, that's
mm,
unusual. But we were both open to listen to each other.
yeah.
And then through my own learning, sometimes I would say, actually, do you know what, that experience you're talking about, that might be this. This is what I've read. And yeah, I suppose it gives a bit of reassurance that,
Mm,
like, oh, okay, these things are not, it's not just you who experiences them. These are things that people have talked about for a long time.
yes.
Maybe we haven't had the opportunity we haven't had an elder who knows about
Mm,
this to share with us and tell us about it. So yeah, so I suppose it's a kind of a learning and maybe filling in little pieces here and there.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And ultimately, it sounds like that was, in your case, and I'm sure it's not always for everybody, but an opportunity to bond and to come closer, to find identification
Yes, yeah,
and to
definitely.
heal, not just your
Hmm.
ex experience of healing, but actually sharing that with your father
Hmm.
in terms of finding those missing pieces and
So
making sense of
partner,
things.
so partner, sorry.
Right, your
Yeah,
partner, my apologies.
partner. Yeah,
Mm,
partner. Not,
mm,
yeah,
yeah. Thank you for
that's
clarifying that.
that's my, yeah, that's my
Mm.
only family that I have is my
Yeah,
partner. Mm.
yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And that's often the case for so many of us, right? Our chosen partner is the individual that we actually choose, to journey these pathways with.
Mm. Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. Yeah.
So in terms of what happened next, so you're doing this alongside, you're an accomplished
Mhm.
yoga teacher, you're an accomplished yoga retreat holder,
Mhm.
space holder.
Yeah.
But did this start to influence the way that you were holding space?
Um, mm, I would say no, not
Mm.
not with yoga, because yoga and African spirituality, they are different.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I personally
Mm.
feel that you have to keep teachings authentic to
Yes.
what they are, rather than making your own blend and your own mix, because that's what we see is where it can cause harm to
Mm.
the culture, to the people. So for me, yes, there is some aspects that I see there is a crossover.
Mm.
However, the yoga is the yoga. The African spirituality is different, but this
Yeah.
did. There is avenues that I share it, which is more with the BIPOC community, where it's more appropriate. So with the Caribbean, African
Mm.
community, and BIPOC,
Yeah.
rather than, so my yoga classes in my hometown is majority white British. My
Mm.
retreats, international retreats, they're quite mixed, but it
Mm.
is yoga. We're in India, so we're focusing on that tradition where we are,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm sharing. So
Yeah. That's really
they're different practices and
they're
they're quite
different,
separate.
and culturally, yeah, there's no appropriation there, right? Because you're respecting the originality, the indigenousness of each of those practices, and that feels
Yeah,
appropriate as you
yeah,
explain that. Yeah.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
guess on a personal basis, as you started to find more of yourself, did you find that it enabled you to, so I guess not that you're bringing in the practices into the space, but actually you as a human, as you start to find these pieces of information and almost it's like a puzzle, right? You're pulling in these pieces about your own identity, you're sharing it with your partner. Did you start to notice growth and change in terms
Yeah,
of how you were moving through the world? Are you happy to tell us a bit more about that?
yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think for me, when I found African spirituality, it was a more coming home.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot of respect for yoga, for Buddhist teachings, for divine feminine,
Mm.
in other areas.
Yeah.
However, there's something different that happens to me when I practice the practices of my ancestors. It feels like home, and unless you have experienced it, it's quite difficult to explain the difference. So they both have, you know, created a lot of healing, growth, all the rest of it, but
Mm.
it feels more rooted.
Yes.
You know, it feels like you're going, because you've already got some of it in you. You've already got the
Mm.
DNA, the ancestral memory. So it feels familiar but unfamiliar at the same time. So yeah, it just brings me a level of rootedness, of peace, of connection. That's probably the biggest one for me, the connection to that, to African spirituality, to
Mm.
the African ancestors. It's also opened the door to my other ancestors, the British ancestors, through that practice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say a connection and holding in that
Mm.
love, because when you're working with your ancestors, you can
Absolutely.
love, um, and compassion, whatever you may need. And I suppose for me, the practice has led me to keep sort of speaking up and almost speak up for them. So certain things I do, and I'm talking about it, it's a like, I honor them by speaking about these things because it's
Yeah.
important, and I know that somewhere down the line they're like, no, you have to keep going, you have to keep speaking.
Yeah. Yeah. We're advocating even for these people that
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
advocate for themselves. Yeah.
yes, yeah, definitely.
And in turn, they're strengthening us, aren't they?
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because ancestors don't just come with, darkness. Because I think that a lot of the ancestral work I have done
Mm,
has been
mhm,
clearing, a lot of clearing
mm,
of,
mm,
yeah, patterns and soul contracts and all of those things. And what's
mhm,
also true is that they give me a lot of strength. They give
mhm,
me a lot
mhm.
of medicine that is,
Yeah, yeah.
I'd always drop in and say, thank you for letting me carry your medicine, and I trust that you'll
Mm,
bring whatever's needed into the space. And
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it feels wonderful to have their
Mm,
support.
mm,
And when I've journeyed with certain practitioners, or I've had, yeah, certain experiences along the way, as I'm sure you have, that, yeah, incredible experience of being visited by or coming into connection with ancestors is like nothing else that you've ever, that I personally have ever experienced.
mhm,
Seeing
mhm,
my ancestors coming into my line of vision and realizing, they're greeting me, these
mhm,
faces coming into my line of vision, and actually wondering, why do they look like this? And then, years later finding out,
mhm,
because my ancestry actually is Sudanese, so that's why these people looked Sudanese. And
mhm, mhm,
yeah, and I don't know if you would identify with this, but for me personally, I'm like in my infancy of finding out about my own heritage, and I'm picking it and finding a sense of belonging and working through my white shame. And that's a whole podcast on its own, right? But there's this element of having always, whenever I would visit Egypt, I would have this sense of home. So I think I've visited there now. I've been there 3 times. Is it 4 times? There's just this sense of ease in my body. And then obviously when I found out about the Sudan connection, I realized, oh, the locality is so directly, and in fact, we would have transitioned through Egypt at some point for sure. And I find that fascinating. Did you have these experiences where you could feel the ancestral pull to certain lands or times and places?
Yeah, so I did go to Ghana about 10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
And then I did do the DNA testing maybe a couple of years ago, and it did say it was mainly Nigerian
Yeah.
and then part Ghanaian and Ivory Coast as well. So when I went to Ghana, I didn't know about this kind of ancestral connection. But the trip itself was, very life-changing experience for me and my partner. We both went there, and a sense of like, yeah, it was a really amazing trip, but not in the sense of different to other trips. It had a different feel to it.
Yeah.
And then also, when was it? Maybe 18 months ago, I went to Ivory Coast. And yeah, that was a really very interesting experience again. And I say with a family, African local family, and that kind of sense of coming home, but also very unfamiliar, very like out of my comfort zone at the same time. So I definitely think that there was some divine intervention that led me to Ivory Coast, because that trip was actually free. I actually had that trip. I was able to get a scholarship to go there. It wasn't a time that I would have been able to afford to go to Ivory Coast, and that allowed me to experience. Like, I learned about the drumming, the dance, met a person who was the griot, so the storyteller. So I learned a lot about the storytelling aspect in West Africa. And yeah, just a really, very, very deep healing experience on lots of levels. It really was. So, and I haven't been to Jamaica since I was a teenager, so that's maybe one to come soon.
You're manifesting it right now, babe. So.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I definitely had, felt very. There was something very healing about being there, but it wasn't a comfortable trip. There's a difference. Sometimes, like, I've traveled quite a bit, and there's places that just I love, but they're very easeful and peaceful. But this was not easeful and peaceful. This was challenging. It was interesting. It was out of my comfort zone, but it was amazing.
Sounds like an awakening, right? Sometimes we have these initiations, these awakenings, and we're like, whoa, this is not the holiday I thought it was going to be, but it's what we need.
Yeah, definitely. So, I can definitely see the connections.
Absolutely love this.
Yeah, the stories and everything.
Yeah, and I love how you touched on the the griot, the storytelling, and the way that different cultures have held the history and have passed it down, and how we, as you are now, you're sharing the story, and you're keeping that skill, that ability, that tradition alive. It's really beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this with us. So this is obviously a passion for you. I can feel your passion. I can feel really activated by this conversation. For me personally, it's really medicinal to hear
Mm.
And I'm kind of curious in terms of, your own journey of transformation, what's really lighting you up right now? What is it? What practices are you working with that are making a difference to you?
That's a good question. There's lots of practices. There's always lots of practices.
A bit of this, a bit of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's quite a lot. So yeah, I mean, just sharing African spirituality, that's a passion that brings
Mm,
me a lot of joy. I really love to work with the divine feminine. So I working a lot with goddess Kali, Lakshmi, Durga, um, Saraswati. So I do a lot of practices around that,
mm,
and mantra. So I do a lot of mantra. But when I say a lot, the last week hasn't been so good. But also, I'm really trying to recommit to learning Sanskrit as well. So
mm,
that is a very that's a divine language of
mm,
sound, of healing. So I'm trying to. I've done a course through the
mm,
through a teacher, through a lineage. So I've had that transmuted to me in the traditional
mm.
way. So I need to just, I'm trying to keep myself going with it. But
Yeah,
for
recommit,
me,
right?
really, one of the main things is nature, being in nature.
Mm,
That's my medicine. I have to
yeah.
do every week in the plants and
Mm,
always people find me in the bushes picking up weeds all the time. So
mm,
yeah,
yeah.
it's quite
And
a
it's such, I mean, that is such interwoven into all cultures, traditions in one way or another, right? And I work with the divine feminine too. And for me, nature is where I feel closest to her very
yeah,
often.
yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. She's weaving in there. And I loved
Mm.
how, you quite compassionately touched on the fact that, yeah, like maybe with the mantra and the pieces that you're currently integrating ultimately, right? So we're not perfect. Nobody's perfect in their healing journey or in their practices.
Not at
We're
all.
just doing our best always. And sometimes we
Yeah.
kind of fall off the wagon and we feel the impact. And then it's like, oh, I haven't practiced, or
Yeah.
you started with this, haven't been putting my needs first. Maybe I've been tending to and caring to others
Going
before.
on in life, isn't there? And sometimes we have the focus and the energy, and other times we need to rest, or
Mm,
other life things we need to deal with them.
yeah, life be lifing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
It does
yeah,
sometimes. Mm.
yeah. And
Mm.
so, in terms of the things that you're doing now and that you're offering, and I know that you have some retreats that you're offering, and
Yeah, yeah.
tell us a little bit about how people are currently working with you or can work with you. I'm really curious.
Yeah, so I have two businesses. So I
Mm,
have yoga with Emma Kelly, very very straightforward.
yeah.
There wasn't much thought that went into that name of that business.
At least people can find you,
People
right?
find me, it's easy to Google, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So that's been something that I've been doing for 10 years, where I teach body positive, gentle, restorative yoga with a lot of
Mm,
meditation, a lot of deep rest, and connecting to the body that you have.
mm,
So I have lots of people who come to me, mainly women, who feel, you know, we all feel it, our body's not good enough. People say I'm overweight, I've got this health condition, I've got that problem. Can
mm,
I do yoga? So it's really about allowing all bodies to practice together.
yeah.
You all are worthy of that healing and wellness.
Mm,
And then I also host international retreats that are for all women as well. I've done that
mm,
for about 8 years to Morocco and India.
mm,
So the next one is to India, where again it's allowing people to have a more of like an immersive experience, and we can learn experience the breadth of yoga. So again, we have depending on the group, but we will have some elements of maybe people will learn a little bit more about mantra. They're going to learn about the culture that they're in. So they're going to see images of the goddesses. They're going to see images of Ganesha. So I like to kind of share what they're seeing. you know. And then I also invite Indian yoga teachers to come in and they share their wisdom and knowledge, because that's really important, where people get that. It's kind of a cultural understanding, but they're going to have I want people to have that deeper experience. That's really, obviously from our conversation, you know, it's always the going deeper, isn't it?
Without a doubt.
But it's also fun. Yeah. So the retreat is, you know, we eat lots of nice food. We have time in nature. We see dolphins. We do some cookery courses, and it's really a way for people to reclaim a bit of their time. So the women who come, they're looking after others, they're busy. And to have that week where they can really focus on their needs, there can be quite an amazing transformation in a week where people have practices daily, but also they have the environment, the people, conversations. There is lots of that happens. So India is coming up in January.
And these immersive spaces are so important, right? So if you really want to experience an activation and a big shift, my experience is these immersive spaces where we go in for a weekend, 6 days, a week, however long it happens to be, are so vital, because creating that safe containment around you to really experience the change without interruption. I just want to touch on as well how I love how your values, you know, your values of justice and equity have evidently come into your practice. In that it makes complete sense, right? If you are hosting a yoga retreat in India, that you would work and be collegiate with people from India to support in the teachings, and there's that equitable exchange, that mutuality, and I really love that. I think that's a really wonderful value, and actually I think that's often missing in these kind of offerings, sadly. And
I would probably agree. Majority.
You know, we want the location, but not necessarily there's no substance perhaps behind supporting the locals in terms
it's
of
a
their
very interesting dynamic, which we could probably do a whole other podcast.
Oh yeah, maybe we'll come back for part 2.
And travel and
Totally.
It's something that I do because when I travel, I want to learn from the people. I want to be around the people. I want to see what their perspective is. So they're my teachers. They're the teachers that had. One of them is from 10 years ago. So he was my philosophy teacher. He was amazing, and you can't find a teacher like that here in England, because you know you can't find people who live yoga. He lives yoga completely.
And so that's the yoga offerings, right? And there's more, isn't there? There's another string to your bow. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So also I have another one called Healing Space BIPOC, which is yoga and wellness for Black women and women of colour. And this is in the UK. So this is day retreats that we have in London, Birmingham, Brighton. And these day retreats they do have yoga. I do teach yoga. We do have the element of, you know, finding that peace, finding rest, and that nourishment connecting to the body. And within these day retreats, they also include somebody else will come in, and depending on the theme. So the one coming up is herbalism for menstrual health. So I have a practitioner. She comes in and gives an amazing talk. We have had like women's circles. We have Ayurveda coming up in August. So we have collaborative opportunity. And then we also have discussions around self-care. So what is some of the maybe intergenerational pieces where we need to unlearn these things around rest, self-care. And then some of them also include an introduction to African spirituality as well. So
Mm.
each one has a slightly different theme, and it's really about safe spaces to connect, to learn from
Yeah.
trusted sources, and really allowing people to be themselves, be
Mm.
themselves fully, and yeah, have that healing opportunity with like-minded
Mm.
people.
It's so important to
So
create
yeah.
that space as well, yeah, for that particular community.
Mm.
I'm pretty sure you're going to see me at one soon, Emma. You're going
Yeah.
to see me at one soon.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Yeah. And
Mm.
so I guess, I mean, we're kind of coming to the end of the podcast, but I'm curious. So I'm going to link to your resources
Yeah.
in the podcast and obviously on my Instagram and stuff. But
Mhm.
how can people find you? What's the best
Mm.
way to find you?
Yeah, so if you're interested in my yoga and international retreats, it's Yoga with Emma Kelly on Facebook, Instagram. That's my website as well.
Mm.
Healing Space BIPOC, it's the word healing underscore, the word space
Mm.
underscore BIPOC, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok.
Wow.
That's the website as well. If you
Amazing.
want to connect on LinkedIn, you can do that as well. But there's
Mm.
probably loads of Emma Kelly, so you might not be able to find me through all that.
LinkedIn definitely needs a bit more of what we've got, right? I would say.
Yeah, but yeah, if you have questions or yeah, you'll find me all over the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. And if anyone struggles to find Emma's resources, feel free to get in touch with me and I'll redirect you for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Mhm.
And so I guess as we start to wrap things up, I'm curious. And you can answer this question from any of your perspectives as a yoga teacher, as a, an individual who's been exploring African spirituality. I'm just curious to see what you'd like to offer to anybody who is embarking on their own journey of healing, seeking some transformational experience. Would you have any wisdom you'd like to share with them?
I suppose it's, I suppose you've got to deal with the weeds, have to deal with them. So we can talk about all these nice things of, meditation, yoga. It feels very nice, the coming together. But if you've got a lot of weeds in your life that you're not addressing, it's not going to bring healing. So if you're in a toxic workplace, if you're in a toxic relationship, if you're, there's things in your life that you're not addressing on the practical level, you're bypassing what really, sometimes you need to get to the root of the messy crap. So it's difficult, it's the most difficult thing. And you can use all your other tools around you to help you, but you've got to go, eventually, you have to go to sort your shit out, basically.
Yeah.
So.
Wise words indeed. Yeah. And for those who are holding space or have an aspiration to hold space for others, any reflections for them?
I think, I think if you can have, I think jumping in without any knowledge or experience or sort of guidance is going to be very, very difficult. So I did, as I said, I was a social worker before. We had to do group work. I had to do that. So yeah, actually have the opportunity to learn from somebody who actually shows you the ropes, who explains some of the theories of group work and dynamics, because it might look like, oh, I can do that. It looks easy. However, you're going to have to learn some skills, some real ground skills and boundaries as well. And also just if you're holding space, try not to take it personal. If somebody is having issues with you or there's some friction, they probably have their own thing. It's going to be difficult. but
Yeah.
people are going through their own process, and you happen to be the person who may have been, you know, triggered them to start
Yeah.
looking at something they're not ready to look at. So
Yeah. It's the projection, right? That's what we
yeah,
call a projection. Yeah.
but also you need to reflect and make sure actually you
Mm.
are
Yes.
doing things
The internal work.
do your internal work, make sure that you are. It's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? Because it's not quite professional. You have to be
Mm.
human, but also you need to have some level of boundaries, and
Yeah.
you can't. Yeah, you need to be. Yeah, have your own boundaries. That certain things, if you're in the process of healing your own stuff,
Mm.
I don't always think it's appropriate for you to bring it into a space where you're holding space for others,
Yes.
because you're gonna
Yeah.
mix up what's yours and what's theirs.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
be very mindful if there's something you're in the mix of. You know, maybe you just share superficially, you share a little bit.
Mm.
But if you're opening a can of worms where you're meant to be holding space.
Yeah.
So don't. There is an element that they can hold space for you, but you are the space holder. You're the one keeping people safe, and if you're
Mm.
not safe, then you're, you know, how can you really create that for other people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes back to that point that we touched on at the beginning of, okay, we go through a journey of healing and then ultimately we become medicine or transformational, kind of a mentor, and we
Yeah,
can lead others through that pathway. But
yeah,
yeah, we need to be doing the healing ourselves, and ultimately yeah, it kind of comes full circle, right? We still need our own mentor, we still need our own teacher, we still need to be able to safeguard ourselves. And for
yeah.
me, a biggest part of the learning has been, how do I be in the as somebody who's naturally empathic,
Mhm,
caring, and has been in many ways conditioned to
mhm, mhm,
caretake others, how
mhm,
do I caretake myself whilst caretaking others? So it's that beautiful muscle that we learn to flex of staying with ourselves whilst
yeah,
holding somebody else in their own experience.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah. And just
yeah,
our humor. Sometimes we're going to be like, wow,
totally.
that was
Yeah,
just
yeah.
so hard what somebody shared, or something
Mm.
may have triggered us. You know, we're human, and we do our best at the same
Yeah,
time.
we do. Yeah.
But yeah,
Oh, what a delicious conversation. Thank you so
we've
much.
gone into so much, haven't we?
Yeah, we covered so much. Yeah, and but it flew by, and yeah, I really am so grateful to you, and I'm sure the listeners will find it fascinating. So yeah, thank you so much, Emma.
Welcome. It was lovely
Yeah,
speaking.
and
Yeah.
thank you to the listeners for staying with us.
Thank you.